Listen to me. There comes a moment in history when a nation just says no more. You know what I mean? A time when being quiet ain't possible anymore, when your honor makes you stand up and speak. And recently that moment happened for India. Not with war, not with yelling, not with drama, but with class, with wisdom and with strength so real it made the whole world pause and say, wait, who is this? You see, people expected India was still going to do that same old thing. You know which one, right? Keep your head low, say please and thank you, shake hands with a smile even when the hit comes from behind. For decades, that's what everyone thought would happen. You get aid, you stay humble, you get business deals, you nod quietly, you get pushed around, you act like nothing hurts. But those times, my friend, they are finished. This ain't the same India from before. This ain't the India that stayed silent when Western leaders got on platforms and spoke badly. This ain't the India that smiled politely while getting treated like a child. No, sir, what the world witnessed this time was something brand new. A new India that doesn't just hear, it responds. A new India that doesn't just attend meetings, it controls them. A new India that ain't begging for respect at the table, it's creating its own table. What took place wasn't just another press conference. It wasn't just some political statement. It was like watching a masterwork. It was smooth. It was controlled. But man, it was freezing cold. You ever see someone shut down a whole room without getting loud? You ever watch someone move the world just by speaking facts? That's exactly what happened here. Now, here's the amazing part. When someone from America or Europe makes a comment, especially from high positions, they expect everyone's going to listen like it's the final word. They think it's gospel truth. They think the whole world's going to do exactly what they say. But when that disrespect came toward India, especially about how they handle their country, about their democracy, about their internal matters, they weren't expecting a fight back. Oh no, they figured India would absorb it quietly like always. They figured India would write some formal response, maybe hold some private discussions, maybe express regret with diplomatic language and move forward. But no, what they received instead was a reply that made the room go silent, because what came back wasn't screaming, it wasn't angry, and it wasn't defensive. It was respectful, but it was brutal. It was truthful, but it was devastating. It was like that moment when you discover the person you've been looking down on is actually 10 times smarter than you. It was one of those responses that didn't just answer the criticism, it exposed how wrong the criticism was. This reply wasn't for political points, it wasn't for popularity, it wasn't for cheers, it was for truth. And let me tell you something important. Truth doesn't need fancy decoration. Truth doesn't need filters. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just enters the room, switches on the light, and lets everything become clear. The world watched as a message was sent that basically said, we don't accept double standards. You talk about democracy, but when it comes to us, suddenly the rules are different. You speak about rights, but when we defend ours, you question our reasons. You talk about values, but when we rise with our own values, you claim we're threatening world peace. Well, let me remind everyone, India isn't being judged. India isn't waiting for approval. India isn't seeking validation. And India absolutely isn't going to follow rules made by people who break them constantly. Now, let me break this down because you need to understand something powerful here. We are living in a world where stories control everything. Whoever owns the narrative, owns the sympathy, owns the funding, owns the partnerships. And for years, that story was told from one direction only. But this time, the script changed hands. And not because India asked for it, but because India earned it. See, when you build a space program with limited money, when you vaccinate 1 billion people while donating vaccines to other countries, when you digitize your economy while pulling millions from poverty, when you climb in global rankings without destroying others, you don't need to request respect. You demand it. So when certain people tried to paint India as problematic, the response wasn't to attack their painting. The response was to give them a mirror. Because sometimes the most powerful action is reflection. Sometimes the greatest strength is staying calm, but calm doesn't mean weak, and reflection doesn't mean silence. And when India responded this time, it was like hearing thunder in clear weather, unexpected, sharp, and chilling. What was truly bold, though, wasn't just the message. It was the attitude. You see, there was no pleading. There was no stepping back. There was no, please understand our position. Instead, the tone was, we're ready to dialogue, we're ready to cooperate, but don't assume for one moment we're going to accept lectures, especially from people who are still cleaning up their own mess. That shook everyone because the West isn't used to that from India. They're used to that thank you, sir approach. But now they got a we're not playing these games approach. They expected a follower. They got a leader. They expected compliance. They got clarity. They expected submission. And yes, they got respect, but it came packaged with sovereignty, pride, and determination. Let's be honest, the world isn't used to India speaking like that, but maybe it's time they get comfortable with it, because India isn't trying to intimidate anyone, but it definitely isn't going to be intimidated either. And that's a frightening kind of composure. You understand? The kind that doesn't tremble, doesn't stumble, doesn't yell, but makes everyone else question their position. And let's not forget the importance of timing. India didn't react immediately. That response wasn't emotional. It was calculated. Like a chess champion, it waited, examined the situation, and then made one move that ended not just a comment, not just a speech, but an entire mindset. Now here's where it becomes deep. What the world just saw wasn't just diplomacy, it was transformation. It was that butterfly moment where the cocoon breaks and wings spread, and those who only saw the cocoon are now amazed by the flight. This wasn't just one statement, it was a declaration of identity. It was a nation standing proud, not by raising fists, but by raising voice and saying, we see you, we hear you, but we define ourselves. That's spiritual power. Because there arrives a moment in every journey, whether you're a person, a nation, or a movement, when you realize you don't owe anyone justification for existing. You don't need to perform gratitude for people who never appreciated your struggle. You don't need to remain small so others stay comfortable. India reached that moment, and when it spoke, it wasn't just representing itself. It was representing every nation that ever got disrespected, every country that ever got lectured while building itself up, every voice that was ever silenced with conditional aid and fake praise, every people that were told, you're not ready yet, you need more development, follow our example. No, this wasn't just India talking. This was history responding. This was centuries of being told you're inferior, now saying back, we're not. This was colonized lands reminding former empires, we surpassed you. This was the overlooked, the ignored, the mispronounced, the dismissed, standing up in professional suits, launching satellites, building global businesses, leading technology changes, and saying, you sure you want to discuss standards? And what really silenced the room wasn't aggression, it was confidence. You know how scary confidence becomes to someone who depended on your insecurity? You know how dangerous you become when you stop asking permission to be great? That's what this was. A nation that understood its value and stopped negotiating it. No more explanations. No more apologies for being strong. No more bending for approval. And the world, oh, the world notice. See, when you build yourself up with dignity, nobody can tear you down without showing their own lies. When you speak with facts, not anger, you leave them searching for responses. When you come prepared, not provoked, you win the long game. That's what we witnessed. A long game played well, played smart, played with quiet fire. And you know what's most beautiful? The very nations that once tried to shape India in their image are now struggling to keep up with India's vision. The very voices that said you're not ready are now realizing they're not relevant. The very hands that tried to guide are now reaching out for partnerships. Why? Because India stopped trying to get invited. It just arrived. And that arrival shook everything. Because when a nation enters the global room, not with arrogance, but with ancient wisdom, not with loud claims, but silent results, not with borrowed dreams, but self-made realities, oh man, that's power you can't control. That's rhythm you can't copy. That's force you can't stop. And it all started with one reply that said everything without needing to say too much. That chilled the room without raising the temperature. That reminded the world India isn't reacting, it's rising. And baby, when a giant wakes up, it doesn't roar, it just stands, and the earth trembles. India didn't escalate, it elevated the conversation and left everyone stunned. And let me tell you, that right there is a different kind of power. Because anyone can shout, anyone can throw punches, anyone can bang podiums and demand attention. But only the truly wise, only the truly confident, only those who know exactly who they are, only they can respond to fire with ice and still win the room. What India did wasn't reaction, it was revelation. And it didn't need drama to get the world's attention. It needed one thing, clarity. See, the real champions in this world don't play in dirt. They don't waste time trading insults in public. They don't lower their standards to meet noise. They raise the bar. And that's what India just did. When fingers were pointed, when accusations were made, when the old power players thought they could still pull strings like it's decades ago, India didn't panic, it didn't fold, it didn't scramble for explanations or soften the impact with politically correct nonsense. No, India stayed calm and then stepped up. Because, let's be real, everyone was waiting for India to explode. They were expecting fireworks, a burst of nationalism, a bitter comeback, some angry statement dressed up in diplomacy. That's what the West was used to from countries who felt cornered. That's what they hoped for too, because escalation gives them excuse to control the story again. But India didn't give them that pleasure. India did something more dangerous. It stayed composed. It stayed surgical. It spoke truth with calmness, so unsettling even the loudest critics went quiet. India's reply wasn't just a press conference. It was a masterclass in restraint and resolve. It was like a seasoned warrior putting down his sword, not because he couldn't fight, but because he knew the battle wasn't worth it. And that silence, that chill in the air, that wasn't weakness, that was strength so controlled, it shook the very foundation of the power games being played. See, that's what they never understood about this new India. This isn't the India that asks permission to be bold. This isn't the India that bends backwards to prove its goodness to countries that can't even manage their own chaos. This isn't the India that needs validation from former empires. This is the India that knows its worth, that knows it belongs at the table, not because it was invited, but because it earned the chair and brought it with confidence. This is the India that understands escalation is for amateurs, elevation is for visionaries. And when Jaishankar stepped onto that stage, he didn't come to fight. He came to remind the world who they were talking to. He came with facts, with perspective, with a kind of tone that doesn't shout but shakes, because every word was chosen, every pause was planned, every sentence loaded with history, truth, and just enough fire to burn through lies. He didn't need to call anyone out by name. He didn't need to yell. He didn't even need to prove anything. All he had to do was stand tall and let truth speak through him. That's the power of elevation. You don't meet petty with petty. You don't answer immaturity with emotion. You rise above it. You change the conversation. You make the world ask bigger questions. You take the moment that was designed to trap you and you flip it into a platform that redefines you. And India did just that. Let's not forget what the real message was. It wasn't just don't mess with our business. That would have been easy. That would have been expected. But India didn't go the easy route. It didn't just defend itself. It exposed the double standards. It asked, why is it that every time we protect our sovereignty, it's called nationalism, but when you do it, it's called leadership? It asked, why is your concern for democracy so selective? Why do you turn up the volume on our issues and stay silent on your own? These weren't attacks, these were questions. Big, bold, honest questions. And that's what rattled them. Because questions like that don't just challenge stories, they destroy them. And when you destroy a story that's been used for decades to keep certain countries in line, you don't just shake one politician or one administration. You shake a system. You shake alliances, you shake comfort zones. And India didn't just knock on that door, it walked through it and turned the lights on. And here's the real twist. The very people who were trying to test India ended up exposing themselves because in trying to corner India, they revealed their own outdated playbook. They still thought they were dealing with a country that needed approval from the West. They didn't realize they were dealing with a nation that's writing new global rules, ones that don't rely on Western approval to be legitimate. India didn't escalate the drama. It elevated the dialogue. It moved the goalposts. It reminded everyone that diplomacy isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who speaks last and with the most weight. And that's what they felt. That's what made headlines. Not just the words that were spoken, but the way they hit, the precision, the posture, the unbothered power. Because let's be honest, what's more powerful than telling your side without raising your voice? What's more revolutionary than refusing to be baited into a shouting match and instead calmly dismantling every lie with facts, history, and reason? That's not just diplomacy, that's dominance. And it wasn't just what India said, it was what it didn't say. That silence in between words, that calm in the storm, that's what got people sweating. Because when a rising power doesn't take the bait, when it doesn't swing wildly, it forces everyone else to look inward. And the West wasn't ready for that. They weren't ready to be questioned on their own record. They weren't ready for the student to become the teacher. India didn't drop the mic. It redesigned the whole stage. It reminded the world that being a global power isn't about how many weapons you have or how loud your media screams. It's about how you carry yourself when challenged. It's about how you respond when provoked. It's about whether you can stay calm while others lose their minds. And make no mistake, India stayed calm. India stayed firm. India didn't shake. It didn't sweat. It didn't falter. It responded with the kind of maturity and moral clarity that made every critic recheck their notes. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough to be felt from Washington to London. It wasn't flashy, but it was strong enough to shift conversations behind closed doors. Because when you elevate, you don't just win arguments, you change minds. You don't just survive scrutiny, you transform perception. And that's what happened here. A new perception was born, a perception of India not as a country reacting to pressure, but as a country setting the temperature. The truth is they weren't prepared for this India. This India doesn't seek to please, it seeks to lead. This India isn't worried about who's uncomfortable, it's focused on what's right. And when someone speaks from that place, from rooted values, from inner certainty, from historical awareness, they don't need to clap back, they just need to speak, and the world listens. And yeah, it left them stunned. Not because they didn't see it coming, but because they thought they'd never have to take it seriously. They thought the old game still worked. They thought the world still operated on the same tired rules. But India didn't play by those rules. India brought its own rule book. And in doing so, it raised the whole damn game. Because here's the secret they're starting to realize. Real power doesn't escalate. It elevates. It chooses its words carefully. It chooses its moments wisely. And when it moves, it doesn't need to push anyone down. It just rises so high, no one can ignore it. That's what India just did. That's what left the room frozen. That's what rewrote the moment. And they all saw it. Every diplomat, every analyst, every leader watching behind the scenes. They saw a nation that didn't blink, a nation that didn't posture, a nation that didn't beg for favor, but spoke from a position of earned respect. It wasn't just about a response. It was about redefining the space, reframing the tone, reclaiming the narrative. And when that happened, when that elevation took place, the old powers didn't know what to do. Because you can't argue with grace. You can't fight calm with anger. You can't trap a voice that's already risen above your frequency. India's reply was a shift from being defined to being the definer, a shift from reactive diplomacy to proactive direction, a shift from asking to leading. And that shift wasn't loud, but it was loud enough to echo across continents because in the end, that's what true leadership looks like. It doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to retaliate. It just rises. And when it rises with calm, with vision, with unapologetic truth, it elevates the whole conversation. And everyone, even those who tried to drag it down, have no choice but to look up and acknowledge the power they just witnessed.